to revisit this, there is actually another reason why these feeder integration into another feeder, this kind of bus route no longer exists nowadays. So I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not talking about like conversions from feeder services into trunk services. I'm not talking about this. It's specifically two feeder services merging into one trunk service. So as you know, in these cases, they are all trunk services. But some bus enthusiasts, they love to coin up the unofficial term called long feeder, which isn't even a legit thing, but this is just how they use the term that they use to describe these bus services. So, but the main point is that um, LTA hasn't been a big fan of this, especially nowadays. Because back then, LTA didn't really have control over bus routes. It's more of like Public Transport Council, like PTC, that's actually controlling all of these routes. But why is that even a big issue? Because based on what I was told, these longer services, they have bad frequency mostly, because when it comes to like individual feeders, it's, or maybe town link in this case, it is easier to control the frequency because you don't really run the service out of town. It's still within the town. But the longer you stretch such services, the more complaints you would attract when it comes to like, as in like, sorry, the longer your service is, the more difficult it becomes to control your frequency. And when that happens and you don't do anything about it, they would start to complain. Like the passengers would actually start to complain. And even though this is not related to feeder plus feeder equals trunk, the trunk services that tend to wind a lot, for example, 28, 99, like these services, they may not have been like feeder integrations or anything, but they kind of act as like feeders within any particular area. So this one, it would be street 45, 34, 32, and then this one would be within Jurong West, the part where it like winds a lot. So 99 in this case, it used to loop at, if I'm not mistaken, it was like Boon Lay Drive, Boon Lay Place, or somewhere along there, and then it got extended to loop at Street 91. And most of you guys are familiar with the one that goes to Street 91. So before it got extended to Joo Koon via Street 93, if I'm not mistaken, when it looped at 91 and 92, the frequency was a lot worse. Like, if you think the frequency of 99 is irregular nowadays, it was a lot worse in the past. Like, you would see the buses, they leave Clementi, right? And then because of all the congestion and everything, and then when it loops back, going towards Street 91 is one thing, but then because they get stalled by like either passengers or like traffic, any of those things, irregular frequency, it becomes a thing. So they keep bunching, especially on the way back. And that's where all the complaints drew in, and that was why SBS was kind of like forced to, because the amount of complaints, right? They were forced to like make it bi-directional when Joo Koon interchange opened in 2015. Historically, 99 has always been a pure Bukit Batok depot service, and then when it got extended, it also became controlled by Sunli as well, so it's now a dual depot. Okay, now not really, but in the past it was basically dual Sunli and Bukit Batok. So the thing that I explained about 99 just now, this is basically QoS, basically quality of service. Because back then, before like the BSCP era, there were lots of services whereby both SBS and SMRT didn't really enforce it well, especially in the case of 969, whereby you cannot depart Tampines Interchange if there isn't another 969 parking at Tampines, your 969 is not allowed to depart basically. They used to have this like rule back then in the day when 969 was express from Tampines all the way till Lentor Avenue. This was before TP bus stop was even a thing. So Lentor Avenue was like the last stop before Tampines interchange, and I could see why they imposed and implemented this, but all of these basically leads to like the quality of service going down. And basically, these three services, they were crayon in the era before QoS was a thing. So yeah, and before it was enforced. And if you fast forward to when the distance fares were introduced, from that era onwards, SBS wouldn't have thought of like doing all the long feeder plus feeder equals a medium distance trunk or a short distance trunk in the context of like service 60, but like past 2010 they didn't even think of doing this anymore, and I'll explain why. Even though this journey is quite unrealistic, let's say you're going from Yunos to Badok. I mean, obviously you would take the buses that are outside, right? But let's say um, you want to meet your friend staying at Badok Reservoir Road, which is like inside Badok Reservoir Road Minor. It's like you want to meet your friend to pass him something before you reach Badok, right? So you're like, okay, I should have reversed the order. I'm sorry. So you take 385, you alight, and then you change 226. But in the past, the way it worked was that as long as you alight and then you tap into another bus service, you do not get such a thing called transfer rebate. Like you just don't get TRF. It wasn't really a thing before 2010. And because of the emphasis on needing direct connections back then, which was a reason that I kind of forgot to mention in the past. Let's say you want to get from 29 an area served by 294 to an area served by 357, or an area served by 220 and to from an area served by 220 to an area served by 290. You want direct travel, right? And you don't really want to pay twice. Like you don't want to be like, I'm gonna take a trunk service and then I want to change a feeder service, right? This was back in the day, okay? Like it doesn't apply to today's context, but back in the day it was like hub spoke wasn't really a thing. Direct connections mattered, and that's kind of the reason why there was an 82 and an 83. One of them from Pongo to Shenton Way, and then the other one from which is 83. Okay, 82 Pongo to Shenton Way, 83 Pongo Road End to 82 Pongo Road End to Shenton Way, and 83 Pongo Road End to New Bridge Road. This one eventually, a part of it became 147, the modern day 147. But basically, these two services duplicated each other up till, if I'm not mistaken, Bendemeer Road and Serangoon Road, which is like the cutoff is at Lavender Street, because 82 goes via Lavender Street, Crawford Street, Beach Road, and then it goes to Shenton Way. And 83 basically just follows present day 147 to New Bridge Road. So that's the part whereby it absorbed that's the part whereby 147 absorbed the route, because 147 used to go via Victoria Street, which is like Bugis, Kalang, Bugis, Kalang Road, basically Lavender MRT station, and then the present day site of Lavender Station, Bugis, Lavender Street, and then Serangoon Road. And the opposite bound, it's basically the same, like Bendemeer Road, Lavender Street, that kind of thing. So 147 absorbed the old 83. Yeah. But the thing is, up till Lavender Street, both of them duplicated. One goes Shenton, one goes Chinatown. Why do we even need services that duplicate each other? Back then there was no NEL. Okay, that's one thing. But then The other issue is really because of the distance fares. Transferring was a thing that was like not highly recommended back then, because you would have to pay twice or pay how many times depending on how many times you actually transfer. Because nowadays, like, if you were to do the exact same journey, you take a bus to Bedok Reservoir Road, like outside, let's say 21, and then you want to change service 60, as long as your transfer time is within 45 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, you would actually be given TRF. Although isn't necessarily the greatest example, because you cannot take service 60 and then TRF to another service 60. Even though you're traveling in, okay, regardless of whether you're traveling in the same or reverse direction, there is no TRF if you're taking the same service. Like, the way TRF works is that you cannot take the same service more than one time within the 4 to 5 transfers. I forgot if it's 4 to 5, but basically, you're not allowed to exceed 45 minutes for your transfer time, and the total time, it's like your 4 to 5 transfer, it has to all be within 2 hours. So as long as your journey, the moment you tap in, it exceeds 2 hours, and then it will be counted as a new ride in that sense. There are like a lot of rules to follow, basically. Not follow, but it's like, if you want TRF, then you have to meet several conditions. Like, your total journey time is within 2 hours, and then when you make one transfer, it's less than 45 minutes. So technically, if you wanted to go to a specific place to eat a quick lunch and then transfer, as long as you eat within 45 minutes, sorry, you eat and then you tap in to the next bus with it all, you do that all, like, basically alight, you have your lunch or your dinner, and then you tap in again. Every single one of that has to be within the 45-minute window. It will be counted as a, you have to do that to be able to, for it to count as a transfer in the first place. But to keep it short, in the past, direct journeys were encouraged, and right now there is a higher emphasis on like hub spoke and transferring, but within a reasonable scope. It's like, if your journey takes like more than 2 or 3 TRFs, you might have to like, you might want to reconsider, right? It's more of like, when your bus doesn't arrive, then you have no choice to transfer. Okay, that's one thing. But like, as much as possible, even though hub spoke is encouraged nowadays, you shouldn't, impose it to the extent that every single one of your journeys has to take more than 2 to 3 transfers. That kind of thing. Pardon my explanation was like kind of long, but I think you guys get it. That these were a result of prioritizing direct connections between the neighborhood, and even for long distance bus services in the past, that's why they duplicated a lot, versus nowadays, whereby TRF exists, and then now distance fares exist. So it's like, it doesn't matter how, what was I trying to say? It doesn't matter which bus service you took. They just go by the amount of distance that you traveled. So again, from Bukit Batok to Clementi, obviously taking 106 would be cheaper rather than taking 173 like all the way, right? But yeah. But the main point is that this is not saying whether you should take 106 or 173. No. This is more of like saying, if your 106 doesn't arrive on time, like let's say you are at Bukit Batok East Avenue 3, which is near Avenue 4. Sorry, Avenue 4, right? Yeah, which is near Avenue 4. If your 106 doesn't arrive on time, you could still do the same journey with 963, but you're going to Clementi, you're going to Clementi MRT, right? From 963, you could take like 99 to go inside, you could take 105, you could take 52, and stuff like that. So this is saying that regardless of whether you're taking 106, regardless of whether you're taking the transfer route, as long as like the distance you traveled is the same, you would still be paying the same fares, kind of thing. And the reason why some people are vehemently against feeders and they just want to get rid of them, it's because some of them are poorly designed and are meaningless. Like you could say the same thing about Yishun in that case. And also the lack of like any long distance bus service that actually goes inside Tengah as of this point in time. So that's kind of like it's not really a direct thing, but it kind of like fuels their hatred for like their feeder, the existing feeder services in general. So basically, distance fares from 3rd July 2010. You no longer have to pay a boarding charge like each time you tap in. And you make a transfer, you simply pay by the distance traveled to get from one place to another place. And basically, these are just like case studies, examples, and stuff like that. You no longer have to pay a boarding charge for the second part of your journey when you tap out and then you tap in again. And then they also talked about like for the MRT, you're only able, I'm not sure if this rule is still in place, but you're only able to enter and exit the MRT station once. An unpaid link doesn't count because for unpaid link, if you tap out and in within like 15 minutes or something, it'll be counted within they wouldn't, you would still get the TRF, and then I'm not sure if it counts as a TRF, but basically if you tap out and in within 15 minutes or so, it wouldn't count as a new ride, that kind of thing. I'm not that familiar with this, but basically in this case study, 154, sorry, $1.54 you would have paid previously on your journey would now only cost $1.48. So instead of in this example, instead of taking 162 direct from like let's say Upper Thompson to all the way to Dhoby Ghat, you could take 162 to Newton MRT in this context, and then you could still take the train to Dhoby Ghat, and then it'll cost, it won't, okay, what was I trying to say? Oh, sorry, this example is like Raffles Place. He doesn't want to take 162 all the way to Raffles Place. He wants to change MRT. He wants to change to the north-south line. Because the thing about this is that they're trying to push you to the MRT and trying to say that like, hey, you just make a transfer and then we would guarantee you that your journey is faster and then you don't have to pay more for transferring. So he just wants to reach on time. So in this example, again, I'm so sorry, from Upper Thompson Road, alight at Newton MRT station and take the train to your office at Raffles Place. With distance fares, you only pay 129 and your journey takes just 35 minutes and stuff like that. Because previously his journey used to take more than 40 minutes, so it's to cut travel time. And then this part is saying that you have to tap out and tap in, if not the TRF wouldn't count. And then this is just telling people how to read the new display panel. And then they say 45-minute allowance between each transfer and stuff like that. I mean, the moral of the story is that the video is actually quite comprehensive and idiot proof in a sense. It's just that the downside of this new model is that, sorry, the way this information is being presented is that they don't take into account like access penalty or like the additional transfer time you need, because it's not like they're kind of focusing on like bus to MRT transfers and not really bus to bus transfers, because most bus to bus transfers you would take an average waiting time of like around 10 to 15 minutes, right, just to wait for the next bus. And then MRT, it's like they're trying to justify that it's like, okay, it's less than 6 minutes, right? Like the maximum waiting time for MRT nowadays, it's like 6 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So in a way, this is trying to like push people to the MRT a little bit using the fact that you can now TRF. But said TRF, be it between a bus and a bus or a bus and an MRT, it really doesn't take into account access penalty, meaning how far you have to walk from one bus stop to another bus stop. Let's say it's not the most convenient transfer in the world, or like from one bus stop to one MRT station, let's say it's a really far walk. Doesn't take into account all of that. And it also doesn't take into account of like the amount of time you spend like actually making the transfer. It will take time, especially if it's a bus to bus. And especially if you take an MRT and you still have to wait for the bus that whose frequency isn't really that good in the first place as compared to a direct ride. This video basically ignores it. So they made a comparison about like how taking the MRT at changing to the MRT at Newton, the entire journey it would take less than 35 minutes, and then without it the journey would take more than 40 minutes because you have to sit through the Orchard traffic, right? Again, it's just an estimation, but they didn't clearly convey. Again, it's an advertisement. It's trying to push people to do certain things. So it really doesn't take into account waiting time as well as like the long walks, basically access penalty. It's just trying to teach people how to make full use of the transfers without actually telling them the downside of said transfers in the first place. So again, how is this even related to the topic? So to put it simply, these services were created way before transferring became a thing, and therefore they emphasized on the need for like direct connections. Whereas nowadays they don't do that. They just tell you to like keep transferring again and again and again. But the main message is that these trunks were created in the previous era. In the current era, they don't do this anymore because they want to emphasize on transferring between a trunk bus to a feeder bus or MRT to a feeder, or like I don't know, regardless of what kind of transfer, trunk to feeder, MRT to feeder, or trunk to MRT and then to trunk again, doesn't matter. The trend nowadays is that they don't try to make things direct just for the sake of making it direct if there is like no reason to make it direct. Back then they actually had a reason to make things direct and offer people who are commuting within two neighborhoods a direct bus service. That was in the past basically. So TLDR, this was the era of the past, emphasizing on direct connectivity within neighborhoods. Currently, they don't do this anymore because you could just transfer, which reduces the need to constantly merge services again and again and again.